Acres of Diamonds by Russell H. Conwell, Part 11. 8. His Splendid Efficiency. Conwell has a few strong and efficient executive helpers who have long been associated with him, men and women who know his ideas and ideals, who are devoted to him, and who do their utmost to relieve him. And, of course, there is very much that thus is done for him. But even as it is, he is so overshadowing a man, there is really no other word, that all work with him, look to him for advice and guidance. The professors and the students, the doctors and the nurses, the church officers, the Sunday school teachers, the members of his congregation, and he has never been too busy to see anyone who really wishes to see him. He can attend to a vast intricacy of detail and answer myriad personal questions and doubts, and keep the great institution splendidly going by thorough systematization of time and by watching every minute. He has several secretaries for special work besides his private secretary. His correspondence is very great. Often he dictates to his secretary as he travels on the train. Even in the few days for which he can run back to the Berkshires, work is awaiting for him. Work follows him, and after knowing of this, one is positively amazed that he is able to give to his country-wide lectures the time and traveling that they inexorably demand. Only a man of immense strength, of the greatest stamina, a veritable superman, could possibly do it. And at times one quite forgets, noticing the multiplicity of his occupations, and that he prepares 2 sermons and 2 talks on Sunday. Here is his usual Sunday schedule. When at home he rises at 7 and studies until breakfast, which at 8:30. Then he studies until 9:45, when he leads a men's meeting, at which he is likely also to play the organ and lead the singing. At 10:30 is the principal's church service, at which he preaches, and at the close of which he shakes hands with hundreds. He dines at 1, after which he takes 15 minutes rest and then reads. And at 3 o'clock he addresses, in a talk that is like another sermon, a large class of men, not the same men as the morning. He is also sure to look in the regular session of the Sunday school. Home again, where he studies and reads until supper time. At 7:30 is the evening service, at which he again preaches, and after which he shakes hands of several hundred more, and talks personally, in his study, with any who are in need to talk with him. He is usually home by 10:30. I spoke of it one evening, of having been a strenuous day, and he responded with a cheerfully whimsical smile, 3 sermons, and shook hands with 900. That evening, as the service closed, he had said to the congregation, "I shall be here for an hour. We always have a pleasant time together after service. If you are acquainted with me, come up and shake hands. If you are strangers," just the slightest of pauses, "come up and let us make an acquaintance that will last for eternity." I remember how simply and easily this was said, in his clear, deep voice, and how impressive and important it seemed, and with what unexpectedness it came. Come and make an acquaintance that will last for eternity. And there was a serenity about his way of saying this, which would make strangers think, just as he meant them to think. He had nothing whatever to do but to talk with them. Even his own congregation have, most of them, little conception of how busy a man he is and how precious is his time. One evening last June, to take an evening of which I happen to know, he got home from a journey of 200 miles at 6 o'clock, and after dinner and a slight rest went to the church prayer meeting, which he led in his usual vigorous way at such meetings, playing the organ and leading the singing, as well as praying and talking. And after the prayer meeting, he went to 2 dinners in succession, both of them important dinners in connection with the close of the university year, and at both dinners he spoke. At the second dinner he was notified of the sudden illness of a member of his congregation, and instantly hurried to the man's home, and thence to the hospital, to which he had been removed. And there he remained at the man's bedside and in consultation with the physicians until 1 in the morning. Next morning he was up at 7 and again at work. This one thing I do is his private maxim of efficiency, and a literalist might point out that he does not one thing only, but 1,000 things. Not getting Conwell's meaning, which is whatever the thing may be which he is doing, he lets himself think of nothing else until it is done. Dr. Conwell has a profound love for the country, and particularly the country of his own youth. He loves the wind that comes sweeping over the hills. He loves the wide-stretching views from the heights and the forest intimacies of the nestled nooks. He loves the rippling streams. He loves the wild flowers that nestle in seclusion and unexpectedly paint some mountain meadow with delight. He loves the very touch of the earth. He loves the great bare rocks. He writes verses at times. At least, he has written lines for a few old tunes, and it has interested me greatly to chance upon some lines of that picture heaven in terms of the Berkshires, the wide-stretching valleys in colors so fadeless, where trees are all deathless and flowers ere bloom. That is heaven in the eyes of the New England hillman, not golden pavement and ivory palaces, but valleys and trees and flowers and a wide sweep of the open. Few things please him more than to go, for example, blackberrying, and he has a knack of never scratching his face or fingers when doing so, and he finds blackberrying wherever he goes, whether he goes alone or with friends, an extraordinary good time for planning something he wishes to do or working out the thought of a sermon, and fishing is even better, for in fishing he finds immense recreation and restfulness, and at the time a further opportunity to think and plan. As a small boy, he wished that he could throw a dam across the trout brook that runs near the little Conwell home, and as he never gives up, he finally realized that ambition, although it was after half a century. And now he has a big pond, 3/4 of a mile long by half a mile wide, lying in front of the house, down a slope from it, a pond stocked with splendid pickerel. He likes to float about restfully on this pond, thinking or fishing or both, and on that pond he showed me how to catch pickerel, even under the blaze of sunlight. He is a trout fisher also, for it is a trout stream that feeds this pond and goes dashing away from it through the wilderness, and for miles adjoining his place a fishing club of wealthy men bought up the rights to this trout stream, and they approached him with a liberal offer, but he declined it. I remembered what good times I had when I was a boy fishing up and down the stream, and I couldn't think of keeping my boys of the present day from such a pleasure. So they may still come down and fish for trout here. As he walked one day beside the brook, he suddenly said, "Did you ever notice that every brook has its own song? I should know the song of this brook anywhere." It would seem as if he loved his rugged native country because it is rugged even more than because it is native. Himself so rugged, so hardy, so endearing, the strength of the hills is his also. Always in his very appearance you see something of the ruggedness of hills, a ruggedness, a sincerity, a plainness that mark alike his character and his books. And always one realizes the strength of the man, even when his voice, as it usually is low. And one increasingly realizes the strength when on the lecture platform or in the pulpit or in conversation he flashes vividly into fire. A big-boned man he is, a sturdy-framed, tall man with broad shoulders and strong hands. His hair is a deep chestnut brown that at first seems black. In his early manhood he was superb in looks, as his pictures show. But anxiety and the work and the constant flight of years with physical pain have settled into his face into lines of sadness and almost of severity, which instantly vanishes when he speaks. His face is illuminated by marvelous eyes. He is a lonely man. The wife of his early years died long, long ago, before success had come, and she was deeply mourned, for she had loyally helped him through a time which held much struggle and hardship. He married again, but this wife was his loyal helpmate for many years. In a time of special stress, when a defalsification of $65,000 threatened to crush Temple College, just when it was getting on his feet, for both Temple Church and Temple College had in those early days buoyantly assumed heavy indebtedness, he raised every dollar he could by selling or mortgaging his own possessions. And in this his wife, as he lovingly remembers, most cordially stood behind him, although she knew that if anything should happen to him, the financial sacrifice would leave her penniless. She died after years of companionship. His children married and made homes of their own. He is a lonely man, yet he is not unhappy, for the tremendous demands of his tremendous work leave him little time for sadness or retrospect. At times the realization comes that he is getting old, that friends and comrades have been passing away, leaving him an old man with younger friends and helpers. But such realization only makes him work with an earnestness still more intense, knowing that the night cometh when no man shall work. Deeply religious though he is, he does not force religion into conversation on ordinary subjects or upon people who may not be interested in it. With him it is action and good works, with faith and belief that count, except when talk is the natural, the fitting, the necessary thing. When addressing either one individual or thousands, he speaks with superb effectiveness. His sermons are, it may almost literally be said, parable after parable, although he himself would be the last man to say this, for it would sound as if he claimed to model after the greatest of all examples, his own way of putting it, and he uses stories frequently because people are more impressed by illustrations than by argument. Another, whether in the pulpit or out of it, is his simple and homelike, human and unaffected. If he happens to see someone in the congregation to which he speaks, he may just leave the pulpit and walk down the aisle while the choir is singing and quietly say a few words and return. In the early days of his ministry, if he heard of a poor family in immediate need of food, he would be quite likely to gather a basket of provisions and go personally and offer this assistance, and such other as he might find necessary when he reached the place. As he became known, he ceased from this direct and open method of charity, for he knew that impulsiveness would be taken for intentional display. But he has never ceased to be ready to help on the instant that he knows help is needed. Delay and lengthy investigation are avoided by him. When he can be certain that something immediate is required, and the extent of his quiet charity is amazing, with no family for which to save money and no care to put away money for himself, he thinks only of money as an instrument for helpfulness. I never heard a friend criticize him except for too great open-handedness. I was strongly impressed after coming to know him that he possessed many of the qualities that made for the success of the old-time district leaders of New York City, and I mentioned this to him, and at once he responded that he had himself met Big Tim, the long-time leader of the Sullivans, and had told him at his house, Big Tim having gone to Philadelphia to aid some henchmen in trouble, and having promptly sought the aid of Dr. Conwell. And it was characteristic of Conwell that he saw what so many never saw, the most striking characteristic for that Tammany leader. For Big Tim Sullivan was so kind-hearted. Conwell appreciated the man's political unscrupulousness as well as he did his enemies, but he saw also what made this underlying power, his kind-heartedness, except that Sullivan could be supremely unscrupulous and that Conwell supremely scrupulous. There were marked similarities in these masters over men, and Conwell possesses, as Sullivan possessed, a wonderful memory for faces and names. Naturally, Russell Conwell stands steadily and strongly for good citizenship, but he never talks boastful Americanism. He seldomly speaks in so many words of either Americanism or good citizenship, but he consistently and silently keeps the American flag as the symbol of good citizenship before his people. An American flag is prominent in his church, An American flag is seen in his home. A beautiful American flag is up in his Berkshire place and surmounts a lofty tower, where when he is a boy there stood a mighty tree at the top, of which was an eagle's nest, which was given the name for the home, for he terms it the eagle's nest. Remembering a long story that I had read of his climbing to the top of that tree, I thought that it was well nigh an impossible feat, and securing the nest by great perseverance and daring, I asked him if the story were a true one. "Oh, I've heard something about it. Somebody said something watched me or something of the kind, but I don't remember anything about it myself." Any friend of his was sure to say something after a while about his determination and insistence on going ahead with anything on which he has really set his heart. One of the very important things on which he insisted, in spite of very great opposition, and especially in opposition from the other church of his denominations, for this was a many years ago, when there was much more narrowness in church and sects than there is at present, was the regard to doing away with close communion. He determined on an open communion, and his way of putting it once decided upon was, "My friends, it is not for me to invite you to the table of the Lord. The table of the Lord is open. If you feel that you could come to the table, it is open to you." And this is the form which he still uses. For he not only never gives up, but, so his friends say, he never forgets a thing upon which he has once decided. And at times, long after they suppose the matter has been entirely forgotten, they suddenly find Dr. Conwell bringing his original purpose to pass. When I was told of this, I remembered the pickerel pond in the Berkshires. If he really is set upon doing anything, little or big, adverse criticism does not disturb his serenity. Some years ago he began wearing a large diamond, whose sides attracted much criticism and caustic comment. He never said a word in defense. He just kept wearing the diamond. One day, however, after some years, he took it off, and people said, "He has listened to the criticism at last." He smiled reminiscently as he told me about this, and said, "A dear old deacon of my congregation gave me that diamond, and I did not have the heart to hurt his feelings by refusing it. It really bothered me to wear such a glaring big thing, but because I did not want to hurt the old deacon's feelings, I kept wearing it until he was dead. Then I stopped wearing it." The ambition of Russell Conwell is to continue working, and working until the very last moment of his life. In work he forgets the sadness, his loneliness, his age. And he has said to me, "One day I will die in harness." End of Part 11. Acres of Diamonds by Russell H. Conwell, Part 12. 9. The Story of Acres of Diamonds. Considering everything, the most remarkable thing in Russell Conwell's remarkable life is his lecture, Acres of Diamonds. That is, the lecture itself, the number of times he has delivered it. What a source of inspiration it has been to the myriads, the money that has been made and is making, and still more, the purpose for which he directs the money. In the circumstances surrounding Acres of Diamonds, in its tremendous success, in the attitude of mind revealed by the lecture itself, and by what Dr. Conwell does with it, it is illuminative of his character, his aims, his ability. The lecture is vibrant with his energy. It flashes with his hopefulness. It is his enthusiasm. It is packed full of his intensity. It stands for the possibilities of success in everyone. He has delivered it over 5,000 times. The demand for it never diminishes. The success grows never less. There is a time in Russell Conwell's youth of which it was a pain for him to think. He told me of it one evening, and his voice sank lower and lower as he went far back into the past. It was of his days at Yale that he spoke, for they were days of suffering, for he had not money for Yale, and in working for more he endured bitter humiliation. It was not that the work was hard, for Russell Conwell has always been ready for hard work. It was not that there were privations and difficulties, for he has always found difficulties only things to overcome, and endured privations with cheerful fortitude. But it was the humiliations that he met, the personal humiliations that after more than half a century make him suffer in remembering them. Yet one of those humiliations came a marvelous result. I determined, he says, that whatever I could do to make the way easier at college for other young men working their way I would do. And so, many years ago, he began to devote every dollar he made from Acres of Diamonds to this definite purpose. He has what may be termed a waiting list. On that list are very few cases he has looked into personally. Infinitely busy man that he is, he cannot do extensive personal investigation. A large proportion of his names come to him from college presidents who know of students in their own college in need of such a helping hand. Every night, he said, when I ask him to tell me about it, when my lecture is over and the check is in my hand, I sit down in my room in the hotel. What a lonely picture, too. I sit down in my room in the hotel and subtract from the total sum received my actual expenses for that place, and make out a check for the difference, and send it to some young man on my list. And I always send with the check a letter of advice and helpfulness, expressing my hope that it will come to be of some service to him, and telling him that he is to feel under no obligation except to his Lord. I feel strongly, and I try to make every young man feel, that there must be no sense of obligation to me personally, and I tell them that I am hoping to leave behind me men who will do more work than I have done. Don't think that I put in too much advice, he added with a smile, for I only try to let them know that a friend is trying to help them. His face lighted as he spoke. There is such a fascination in it, he exclaimed. It's just like a gamble, and as soon as I have sent the letter and crossed a name off my list, I am aiming for the next one. And after a pause, he added, I do not attempt to send any young man enough for all of his expenses, but I want to save them from bitterness, and each check will help, and two, he concluded naively, in the vernacular, I don't want them to lie down on me. He told me that he made it clear that he did not wish to get returns or reports from this branch of his life work, for it would take a great deal of time in watching and thinking, and in reading and writing of letters. But it is mainly, he went on, that I do not wish to hold over their heads a sense of obligation. When I suggested that this was surely an example of bread cast upon the waters that could not return, he was silent for a little and then said thoughtfully, as one gets on in years, there is satisfaction in doing a thing for the sake of doing it. The bread returns in the sense of effort made. On a recent trip through Minnesota, he was positively upset, so his secretary told me, though being recognized on a train by a young man who he had helped through Acres of Diamonds, and who, finding that this was really Dr. Conwell, eagerly brought his wife to join him in the most fervent thanks for his assistance. Both the husband and wife were so emotionally overcome that it quite overcame Dr. Conwell himself. The lecture, to quote the noble words of Dr. Conwell himself, is designed to help every person of either sex who cherishes the high resolve of sustaining a career of usefulness and honor. It is the lecture of helpfulness, and it is a lecture, when given with Conwell's voice and face and manner, that is full of fascination, and yet it is so simple. It is packed full of inspiration, of suggestion, of aid. He alters it to meet the local circumstances of the thousands of different places in which he delivers it, but the base remains the same, and even those to whom it is an old story will go and hear it time after time. It amuses him to say that he knows individuals who have listened to it 20 times. He begins with a story told to Conwell by an old Arab as the two journeyed toward Nineveh, and as to listen you hear the actual voices and you see the sands of the deserts and the waving palms. The lecturer's voice is so easy, so effortless, it seems so ordinary and matter-of-fact. Yet the entire scene is instantly vital and alive. Instantly the man and his audience under a sort of spell, eager to listen, ready to be merry or grave. He has the faculty of control, the vital quality that makes him the orator. The same people who will go and hear this lecture over and over, and that is the kind of tribute that Conwell likes. I recently heard him deliver it in his own church, where it would naturally be thought to be an old story, and where presumably only a few of the faithful would go. But it was quite clear that all of his church are the faithful, for it was a large audience that came to listen to him. Hardly a seat in the great auditorium was vacant, and it should be added that although it was in his own church, it was not a free lecture, where a throng might be expected, but each one paid a liberal sum for a seat. And having paid of admission is always a practical test of the sincerity of desire to hear. And the people were swept along by the current as if the lecturer and lecture were of novel interest. The lecture itself is good to read, but it is only when it is illuminated by Conwell's vivid personality that one understands how it influences in the actual delivery. On that particular evening, he decided to give the lecture in the same form as when it was first delivered many years ago, without any of the alterations that have come with time and changing localities. And as he went on, with the audience rippling and bubbling with laughter as usual, he never doubted that he was giving it as he had given it in the years before. And yet, so up to date and alive, must he necessarily be, in spite of the definite effort to set himself back. Every once in a while he was coming out with illustrations from such distinctively recent things as the automobile. The last time I heard him was the 5,124th time for the lecture. Doesn't it seem incredible? 5,124 times. I noticed that he was to deliver it in a little out-of-the-way place, difficult for any considerable number to get to, and I wondered just how much of an audience would gather and how they would be impressed. I went over from there I was a few miles away. The road was dark, and I pictured a small audience, but when I got there I found the church building in which he was to deliver the lecture had a seating capacity of 830, and that precisely 830 were already seated there, and that there was a fringe of others standing behind. Many had come from miles away, yet the lecture had scarcely, if at all, been advertised, and people said to one another, "Aren't you going to hear Dr. Conwell?" And the word had thus been passed along. I remember how fascinating it was to watch that audience, for they responded so keenly and with such heartfelt pleasure throughout the entire lecture. And not only were they immensely pleased and amused and interested, and to achieve that as at a crossroads church was in itself a triumph to be proud of, but they knew that every listener was given an impulse toward doing something for himself and for others, and that at least some of them the impulse would materialize into acts. Over and over one realized what a power such a man wields, and what an unselfishness. For far on his years as he is, and suffering pain, he does not chop down his lecture to a definite length. He does not talk for just an hour or go on grudgingly for an hour and a half. He sees that the people are fascinated and inspired, and he forgets pain, ignores time, forgets that the night is late, and that he has a long journey to go to get home. He keeps on generously for 2 hours, and everyone there wishes it were 4. Always he talks with ease and sympathy. There are generally composure, humor, simple and homely jests, yet never does the audience forget that he is every moment in tremendous earnest. They bubble with responsive laughter or a silent and riveted attention. A stir can be seen to sweep over the audience of earnestness or surprise or amusement or resolve. When he is grave and sober or fervid, the people feel that he is himself a fervidly earnest man. And when he is telling something humorous, there is on his part an almost repressed chuckle, a genial appreciation of the fun of it, and not in the least as if he were laughing at his own humor, but as if he and his hearers were laughing together at something which they were all humorously cognizant. Myriad successes in life have come through the direct inspiration of this single lecture, for one hears of so many that there must be vastly more that are never told. A few of the most recent were told to me by Dr. Conwell himself, one being of a farmer's boy who walked along a great distance to hear him. On the way home, so the boy now, a man has written him, he thought over and over of what he could do to advance himself, and before he reached home, he learned that a teacher was wanted in a certain country school. He knew that he did not know enough to teach, but was sure he could learn, so he bravely asked for the place, and something in his earnestness made him win a temporary appointment. Thereupon he worked and studied so hard and so devoutly, while he daily taught, that within a few months he was regularly employed there. And now, says Conwell abruptly, with his characteristic skimming over the intermediate details between the important beginning of a thing and the satisfactory end, and now that young man is one of our college presidents. And very recently a lady came to Dr. Conwell, the wife of an exceptionally prominent man who was earning a large salary, and she told him that her husband was so unselfishly generous with money that they often were almost in straits. And she said that they had bought a little farm on a country place, paying only a few $100s for it, and that she said to herself laughingly after hearing the lectures, "There are no acres of diamonds in this place." But she went on to tell him that he had found a spring of exceptionally fine water there, although in buying they had scarcely known of the spring at all. And she had been so inspired by Conwell that she had the water analyzed, and finding that it was remarkably pure, had begun to have it bottled and sold under a trade name as special spring water. She is making money, and she also sells pure ice from the pool, cut in winter time, all because of acres of diamonds. Several $1,000,000 in all have been received by RUSSELL CONWELL as his proceeds from this single lecture. Such a fact is almost staggering, and it is more staggering to realize what good is done in the world by this man, who does not earn for himself, but uses the money in immediate helpfulness. And one can neither think nor write with moderation when it is further realized that far more good than can be done directly with money he does by uplifting and inspiring with his lecture. Always his heart is with the weary and the heavy laden. Always he stands for self-betterment. Last year, 1914, he and his work were given unique recognition, for it was known by his friends that this particular lecture was approaching its 5,000th delivery, and they planned a celebration of such an event in the history of the most popular lecture in the world. Dr. Conwell agreed to deliver it in the Academy of Music in Philadelphia, and the building was packed and the street outside were thronged. The proceeds from all sources for that 5,000 lecture were over $9,000. The hold which Conwell has gained on the affections and respect of his home city was seen not only in the thousands who strove to hear him, but in the prominent men who served on the local committee in charge of the celebration. There was a national committee, too, and a nationwide love that he has won. The nationwide appreciation of what he has done and is still doing was shown by the fact that among the names of the notables on this committee were those of 9 governors of states. The governor of Pennsylvania was himself present to do Russell Conwell honor, and he gave him a key emblematic of the freedom of the state. The freedom of the state, yes, this man, well over 70, has won it. The freedom of the state, the freedom of the nation. For this man of helpfulness, this marvelous exponent of the gospel of success, has worked marvelly for the freedom, the betterment, the liberation, the advancement of the individual. End of Part 12.